Okay, here we go for another lecture. All right. Hello, everybody. Let's open up our slides for this week. All right. All right. Yes, I'm just going to wait for a few more people to arrive, and then we'll begin. I just have a little bit of housekeeping news for everyone. And oh, here's some more people. Let's let them join. Yeah, so just going to be a little bit of housekeeping, and then the lesson or lecture, which is a little bit less dense than we're used to actually this time, which is kind of nice. And let's see, let us share my screen now that I have slides open. Ah, what the? We are screen sharing. Excellent. The beginning. All right. Oops. And now, oh, there's everybody. Now I can see. Down here. All right. So what time is it? I think I'll just wait a couple moments more. Oh, of course. I want to make sure that I'm actually recording this.
It says recording.
Ah, perfect. My computer's a little slow, so it's always tricky to switch windows and check things. So that's good. All right, well. Yes, chaotic, too many windows. I have a small screen and limited computational resources, which is lame, but maybe one day soon I will acquire a more powerful machine. That would be cool. Well, there are how many? 14 people here. Ah, cheers. Cheers, Chelsea. Fingers crossed. 14 people. That's enough to get started. Why not? I want to start with a little housekeeping first. So, yeah, I'm not sure why I planned things this way when I was putting the course together. I guess it was just in my rush to make sure I had a good schedule set up. But in that rush, I seem to have made a rather silly schedule. And I'm saying that because, oh, let's let that person in. I'm saying this because, according to my the schedule, yeah, I've made the critical response, the next critical response due on the 8th, and then there's nothing else due until the 5th of November. And I thought that's a little silly. So what I think I'm going to do is offer, well, it's not really offer an extension, but I think I'm going to push back the due date for the second response. And I assume there's not going to be any objection to doing that. I'll just say, well, there's 15 of you here now. So we'll say, let's sample. Okay, yeah, Chelsea says, thank God. Rawan says, yeah, I've got so many things due. Yes. Da, 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 da. Yeah. Okay, everybody's down with that. So that's awesome. I don't know when I'm going to push it back until maybe next Friday instead of this Friday. I'll make an announcement, and this will also allow me to get the feedback to you, because as things were, time for the feedback. Yeah, because I would have been rushing to get this done, and that means that my feedback isn't as good as it can be, and that you would have less time to make use of it. So yeah, tentatively, let us say next Friday, but I'll make an announcement. Everybody's waiting for, everybody's really waiting for their feedback. Now Gracie has a question here that I don't want to forget. Can we go over big ideas topics of those 2 last weeks to inspire our reading responses? I think we can take a few minutes to do that. So yeah, we'll do that now. And just to answer the latest question, we won't be, it will not, I can guarantee it will not be due any earlier than next Friday. So no worries there. So the question was from Gracie, can we go over some big ideas or topics? Oh, wow. Oh, now everybody shows up after I've already delivered the good news. Okay, so for those people who are just arriving now, I'm going to push back the due date for the critical response. It will be due no earlier than next Friday, which I believe is the 15th. Is it the 15th? Yeah. So, good news, no objections, awesome. Now let us, if there's any questions in particular that any of you want to ask me in order to perhaps get a little bit of inspiration for your next response, because this material is just so dense, right? And it's hard to kind of, maybe it's hard to zero in on something that you might like to discuss. So Gracie was asking about that. So Gracie or anyone else, if you have maybe like some general idea that you want to make more specific, or if you have a question that might help make things clearer, I'll take those questions now before we get started, because today's lecture shouldn't be all that dense. So we have a few minutes where we can do this now.
I'm sorry, so which chapters will this reading response be on now?
Well, the way I usually do the reading responses is that anything in the class up until now that we've discussed is actually fair game. So
okay.
Yeah, so you could in theory do something all the way from back to chapter 1, but if you do that, it's still a good idea to tie it to something recent, because you don't want to, just spend the entire class working on stuff from the beginning of the book and never get to talk about anything from the end, right?
Yeah, I wasn't going to do that. I was thinking like later on, because, we don't want to repeat stuff. So, yeah, honestly, I still have to think of even the topic. So I don't really have any questions as of now.
Okay. But if anyone does, I mean, just to remind everyone, Discord, my Discord server is there for this purpose. If people need to pick my brain, just set an appointment. Also email, if it's something that can be answered without like a bit of a conversational sort of thing, then emails are good. All right, so just before we get going, anything else that anyone else might be wondering about? Gracie says, okay, now that it's pushed back. Yeah, good. So still though, if time goes on and you want to pick my brain, don't be shy. So far, it seems, though, that everybody is pretty good, pretty clear. So that's good. So yeah, no earlier than the 15th. I'll make an announcement soon. And this way I can get lots of detailed feedback to you. And you will have lots of time to make use of that feedback. So that's good. So let's get into this week's material. Oh, I always close the chat right when I get a chat thing. Yes, you're welcome, everybody. This is better for everybody, better for you, better for me. Just everybody benefits this way, I think. So let's see here. All right. So recap. Remember, the last chapter was really all about evaluating these two different kinds of theories. There's a group of theories called mixed theories. They treat it as one theory, but really it's like a group of theories. They all have this common feature that they share, and that is that emotions are wholly or partially constituted by cognitive states. Cognitive states, of course, include beliefs and desires. So we're talking mental states. We're talking propositional attitudes, right? Think back to the folk psychology discussion we had in the previous lecture. So that doesn't really work, though. So they move on to the mixed theory. Now, why does number one not work? Well, basically, the reason is that let's just close this here. The reason is that if we think of emotions as constituted by a mix of beliefs and desires, there's still a sort of explanatory gap that opens up there that doesn't really explain the connection we need between what types of emotions are supposed to represent. For example, if fear is supposed to represent, if it has a correlational theme, to use Lazarus's terminology, of danger, then how do we get from recognizing from the belief that this particular dog is snarling at me, say, to the belief that the dog is dangerous, to the belief that I am in danger, to form the desire to get away from the danger, right? There's a missing link in that chain, so the authors argue. That's the problem with number one. And that's, of course, how they get to number two. Emotions aren't really combinations of beliefs and desires. They certainly, require them. Beliefs and desires may be important ingredients in emotional experiences, but they're not constitutive of emotions themselves. So beliefs and desires might be coupled with emotions, but they're not constitutive of them. And we saw this when we looked at the example of the snarling dog, right? It's the emotional fear response that actually represents that core relational theme of danger, which gets us from, fear being the desire to avoid danger and the belief that the dog is a danger. It's the emotion that links those two together. So representations on this account, or emotions on this account, are representations of how desires actually fare, whether they are satisfied or frustrated, right? So this is the desire, satisfaction, frustration account that we talked about. And I've just included this last bit for a bit of a chuckle. This is the bit at the beginning of the present chapter. As the authors put it, as we advanced through the dialectical thickets of desire-based accounts in the last chapter, so here they're talking particularly about two, we presented and assessed an account of emotions that conceives of them as representations of the satisfaction or frustration of our desires. And oh, what dialectical thickets they lead us through. Remember, they're doing ordinary language philosophy. And this is why, some of these chapters get so dense. Yeah, Chelsea, you get it. It's like we're being led. There's an expression in philosophy, we're being led through the wood path, right? It's like we're making we're taking a long winding hike through a dense forest when we do this kind of thing. but it's necessary and useful. And now that we've done a lot of it in the earlier chapters, as we move into the later chapters, they get a little bit less dense, which is very nice, you know. So the authors do not think that the desire satisfaction approach is, in fact, satisfying. That being said, though, they do think there is a very important connection between values and emotions. And that's kind of where they leave things off at the end of the last chapter. What they want to do in this chapter is to explain and motivate the connection between emotions and values. So there are a couple of aims that we have to undertake here. So basically, we're going to try and do two things here. We're going to explain, on the one hand, the substantial roles that values are thought to play in emotions. That's mostly what we'll be concerned with today. And then next time, we're going to examine whether the nature of values actually allows them to play the role in the emotions that some theorists suppose that they do. So those are the goals for the present chapter. So we need to talk about emotions and values. So here we go again. Ordinary language corroborates this link between emotions on the one hand and values on the other. So the authors never cease to remind us that they're taking an ordinary language approach, which is, you know, thinking about how we actually use these words, right? And what does that tell us about the ideas that the words actually refer to? And that's how we can come to know about things like values and emotions. And you know, this all ties into a broader view of language as intimately linked with cognition. So you might think on a first pass, like, oh, ordinary language, why on earth would we be concerned with that? Well, it's because language tells us something about the way we think about things. By studying the way we talk about different values and emotions, we can actually come to understand more about how we conceptualize them. And in doing that kind of analysis, we come to see more clearly what these things actually are, right? So that's why we're taking this approach. So to quote the authors, what they say on page 40, they say, according to the idea that emotions are types of evaluation, having an emotion amounts to apprehending the object of the emotion in evaluative terms. Feeling shame or amusement consists in apprehending a given object as, respectively, shameful and amusing. And that's pretty straightforward, right? We can think back to the snarling dog example again. If I am afraid of the snarling dog, what I'm doing is representing the snarling dog as frightening. And that representation of the dog as frightening is telling me that there is a danger there, a proximal danger, right? So very straightforward. Ordinary language really illuminates that connection for us. Emotions are basically like evaluations or value judgments. Now, we've spent a lot of time already, you know, in our lectures about what emotions are, but we haven't really talked about what values are. So when we talk about, and here's why we have to be careful, you know, everything I said about ordinary language notwithstanding, we still have to pay attention to the differences between sort of everyday concepts and the concepts that philosophers work with. So, you know, what are values? What are we talking about when we talk about values? I mean, philosophers have one thing in mind. What do we have in mind when we talk about values in sort of the everyday sense? I'll just open it up to everyone here, and we'll see if we can use the examples to differentiate between the kinds of things that everyday people value, what a value is for, you know, a lay person versus what you know, a philosopher would say. Yeah, so these all three from Chelsea, Robin, and Ellen are good answers. So let's go one by one through here. Why can't I use this properly? What things mean to us? Yeah, like a specific example though. maybe a pet might mean something, or a partner, or a project at work or something. These are things we can value. So like Robin says, things you care about or take as being important. Ellen, you're correct. Moral standards, moral values definitely seem to count as values, not just in the everyday sense, but in the philosophical sense. And Isabella echoes that. You're right. Absolutely right. Being environmentally friendly is positive. Don't be rude to customer service workers. Yes. Healthy habits. Yeah. So health would be a value. And the habits that are conducive to health, loyalty to loved ones, valuing music. Yeah. Self-respect. Yeah. So there's lots of different things we can value, but notice in all of these examples that we characterize most of these things as positive, right? Most of the time when we talk about things we value in a sort of everyday sense, we're talking about things that we think of, that we value positively, right? And I would say all of these count as positive. But philosophers don't just speak of positive values, and we've got lots of examples of positive values. They also talk about negative values. Negative values, that might sound a bit weird. But what would an example of a negative value be? It's a bit tricky because we're not used to thinking of values like this. Yeah. Disvaluation, right? Murder is bad. So you do not value murder. We would say that that's a negative value, right? Cruelty, yeah. Selfishness. Although some people might disagree there. In philosophy, we talk about, we don't really talk about selfishness, but we talk about egoism, right? Putting yourself before others. Narcissism, valuing money. Depends. It depends. I think valuing money could be good or bad. It depends, right? What is that line from the Old Testament? The love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, right? That's true. But in the society we live in, we need money, which, can't really do anything about that. Racism, yeah. So we would say, yeah, racism is a great example of something that most people hopefully negatively evaluate, right? Yeah, people who aren't understanding, right? So if you disvalued people who are not understanding, you're saying what I value positively are people who understand me, and I do not value, or I negatively value, those who do not. Actually, yeah, later on in the chapter, we focus on, I'd say, the individual side of things. See, it's hard to tease this apart because the first whole bit of the chapter is all about subjectivism about values, right? But there are problems with that, as we'll see. Question for the critical response: could we discuss something that may be seen as a negative value and argue why it could be positive? Yeah, I mean, yeah, and I would take into account what we're about to cover here, in fact, if you were to take that approach. So yeah, absolutely. So here's the other thing. Philosophers don't just talk about positive and negative values. They also talk about values as if they are not just abstract, mysterious ideals. They are instead taken to be concrete properties that events can have, or people or situations, so on and so forth. They're actually taken to be concrete properties that entities in the world or situations in the world possess. This might sound a little bit funny, right? And we'll get to the are they natural kinds? or just a natural? Just to clarify. Well, I wouldn't say that. But but then again, this is one of those weird things that pops up, a weird issue that pops up if we want to be realists about evaluative properties. How could they? We want to be realists about them, but how could they exist without a subject to make the value judgment, right? This is why this is hard. Yeah, this is why this is tricky. But we're going to start on the subjective end of things, right? But why would we think of emotions as apprehensions of evaluative properties? You know, evaluative properties are supposed to be concrete properties that objects in the world have. And emotions are apprehensions of those properties, right? So that's how philosophers want to think of these properties. So why should we think this way? Well, one reason is that occurrences of a type of emotion are actually unified. Different occurrences of fear are all unified as instances of fear or fright by means of the evaluative properties of that emotion type. We call the evaluative properties of emotion types the formal properties or formal objects. So for fear or fright, what makes, for example, all instances of episodes of fear count as the same emotion type is the formal object of fear, which could be the apprehension that whatever it is, the object, the person, the situation is threatening or dangerous, right? The formal objects are basically what a theorist like Richard Lazarus calls the core relational theme of the emotion. And I know we haven't really talked about Lazarus's theory in much detail, but I like to drop little breadcrumbs as I go. So, and this is helpful, right? You can see why this is helpful. Emotions have all kinds of particular objects. Lots of different particular objects could be apprehended as dangerous or threatening, and they might elicit a fear response, right? A snarling dog can elicit a fear response. A pandemic can elicit a fear response, right? You might be afraid of catching that virus. Maybe some shady looking characters walking around your neighborhood at night would cause a fear response, you know, that's possible. See some people, maybe they look like they're up to something and get a little creeped out. Or spiders, or you know, even irrational fears like fear of birds. We apprehend all of these particular objects as dangerous or threatening because they all share, all these particular objects have in common the same formal object. The formal object, you know, is that it is dangerous or threatening. Danger, physical harm, the threat of physical harm. This is the formal object that makes all of these count as the same emotion type, the type of emotion that is fear. So formal objects help us to identify all of the different types of emotions and to individuate between them, right? Fear has a different formal object than disgust, right? Disgust, you know, disgust is interesting because disgust might also be an apprehension that an object is dangerous or threatening, but in different ways than a frightening object is. So, you know, just throwing that out there. But the key takeaway here is that the formal objects of emotions are what allow us to say, okay, there's this type of emotion, fear, and this is why all of these particular objects, dogs, shady looking people, birds, might be identified as frightening. So Robin asks, could a formal object of excitement be the anticipation of an upcoming event? Yes, exactly like that. Exactly like that. That is what I would say. The formal object might be anticipation of the event, but whatever type of event, there are many types of events that we can anticipate. So maybe you anticipate going to a sports game. Maybe you anticipate taking a test because you know you'll ace it. Maybe you anticipate Thanksgiving dinner. I don't know. Lots of things you can anticipate. That's the formal object of perhaps excitement, anticipation. And the particular objects would be what we apprehend as, exciting, what we are anticipating, right? So the formal objects, Leslie says, so it's like the formal objects will help us to figure out why we're feeling the emotions we're feeling. Yes, they help explain that. Yeah, they add the details, like Chelsea says here. Or, as I said a moment ago, what Lazarus would have called the core relational theme between the organism and the environment. And yes, also justification and correctness. Yes. But we're going to get to that in a moment. So not only by introducing formal objects, it helps us to say, there's this type of emotion, this type, and this type, and there are particular objects that can be apprehended so that, we can say why this emotional episode counts as fear, and this one counts as disgust, and this one counts as excitement. Does this term form have anything to do with logic form? Like formal, like, is it the same as the way we use formal in formal systems, talk of formal systems, formal arguments? Yeah. I'm actually not sure about that. It could be formal object, could be like formal, almost like in a Platonic sense. Like, but don't quote me on that. That's just me spitballing. But yeah, formal systems are, I'd look into it. Could be a good footnote to stick in a critical response, right? But yeah, the formal object is the thing, the thing that we apprehend that tells us, is it this or is it that? That's why I make the suggestion that it's almost kind of Platonic, right? Because that's what Plato was saying with his theory of forms. But so much for that. Let's move on. How are we doing for time? 8:05. My, the time flies. So yeah, another cool thing that introducing formal objects helps us to do is to clarify the intentionality of emotions, right? We've talked about how emotions are always about things or directed at things, but we haven't really said, what. And that means that so far our discussion that emotions are intentional states has been sort of implicit, right? But formal objects helps to make the content or the introduction of formal objects talk, helps us to make emotional content explicit rather than implicit, right? So that is to say, we can say, with the formal objects, we can say what our emotions are really about. We can say that fear is about a danger, a physical danger, or an impending threat, right? Specifically, we know that emotions are about things. Like, if I get angry at someone, I can say like, oh yeah, I'm angry at Jones over here. But why am I angry? Well, maybe I'm angry because he's wronged me somehow, or he's made some kind of trespass against me. He's crossed me somehow. So I can say explicitly, this is why I'm angry, right? So that's good. That's a nice thing. It also helps to highlight the fact that emotions are not just about particular objects, right? They are about those objects in particular ways, right? My emotion could be directed at, I don't know, maybe I walk into the living room, and I'm sorry, this is kind of a gross example, but I might see some poop on the floor. Okay, my dog has had an accident, so I could have any number of responses directed at that. There's a particular object there, poop. Now, if I'm angry, that emotion has the formal object of, this injustice or something, right? I have been wronged by Tula pooping on the floor. But I could also experience something else. Maybe I'm not angry. Maybe I'm just disgusted because it's really smelly, right? So the particular object is the same, but the formal object, whether it's a formal object of anger or disgust, presents that particular object in those different ways. This is how it allows us to distinguish between emotion types, right? So it's kind of like, I don't know, this is a pretty superficial connection, but has anybody read Frege? Sense and Reference? Oh, I'm glad. I'm glad this could be helpful. Yes. Yeah, it's a silly example, but it worked. So Hayden, you've taken a look. Robin, yeah, Chelsea's heard the name. So you might have an idea what I'm going to say, right? Frege was all about sense and reference, right? Yeah, a lot of people say Freg. They're like Freg. I went to school with a fella in grad school. Yeah, my old colleague Nathan from grad school, and he was a big guy, almost as tall as me. Liked to lift weights. He was like a bodybuilder and had a really deep voice and spoke very seriously all the time. And he was really into analytical philosophy. And I made the mistake of saying, "Oh yeah, I'm teaching some Frege in my class." No, Frege, not Freg, Frege. So very cool. A little trip down memory lane there. But yeah, Frege has these different modes of Frege. He has these different modes of presentation, right? Like there's a referent, and this is all philosophy of language, but there's a referent that's always the same, but it can be presented in different senses, right? So there is a person, there is Clark Kent, right? And there is Superman. Now, those two words both have the same, Hesperus and Phosphorus are both the planet Venus. So same referent, different senses. Darth Vader and Anakin Skywalker are the same person. Same referent, different senses, right? Superman, Clark Kent, Walter White and Heisenberg, right? Same referent, different senses. This is the same kind of thing, right? Same particular object, different formal objects give us the different emotional responses. So this is a loose example with Frege, but it might help you think your way through it, right? So I don't know if that's helpful, but maybe it is. Hopefully it is. Oh, and here I've even maybe that was completely unconscious when I was writing these slides. I say here, appealing to formal objects helps to clarify the sense in which the emotions help us to apprehend important features of the world. Oh, that's a little unconscious Fregean sense and reference there in my slides. So yeah, weird how the brain works. Yeah, it's weird. So another thing that introducing formal objects helps us to do is it helps us to understand how or why emotions can be appropriate or inappropriate. And this kind of gets back to what Chelsea mentioned in the chat a moment ago. Appealing to formal objects helps us to specify the justification and correctness conditions of emotions, right? So let's try and think of some examples to highlight how invoking formal objects can help us to do that. Now, remember, justification and correctness. We would say an emotion is justified if you have some reason, some sort of cause to feel that way. And we would say it's correct if, you know, the emotion is appropriate for the situation, right? So, you know, to use the old example, if I've sent my cat to the vet because he's sick and I'm worried about him, and then the vet calls me and says, good news, your cat is going to be okay. I feel relief, and I've justified in feeling relief. I have some reason, some epistemic grounds to feel it. And it's correct because it's the correct response in that situation. If my vet called me and said, your cat's going to be okay, and I said, damn it, I was hoping he would die, you know, that's not really a correct emotional response, right? It's strange. It's kind of messed up. And yeah, shows you, highlights what you value, right there. And there, if I were to react that way, like, woo, thank goodness, stupid cat, you know, that would be me making what we could consider an inappropriate value judgment. I should value that my cat is okay. I should value his well-being, right? Could correctness be subjective? Well, this is one of the problems, right? Formal objects give us a sort of correctness condition and justification conditions, but they can also be subjective. That's the problem, right? A lot of philosophers, anyway, want to say that they are, but not Deonna and Teroni. They don't want to say that values are subjective. They want to be realists about values, which is weird. But I think they might be onto something. So yeah, and cultural context. Yeah, I mean, yeah, cultural context. I mean, context matters, I think, more in the case of emotions than it does in, say, like knowledge, right? When we talk about knowledge and belief and stuff like that, we saw this all the way back in chapter 1. Knowledge, belief, other mental states also have justification and correctness conditions, but those seem to be less subjective, right? In certain cultures, there are things that maybe you are expected to value, right? Like I could go and eat a BLT, you know, and I would feel satisfied because bacon, you know. But a vegetarian or somebody who comes from a culture where there's a pork taboo, then they might feel disgust or revulsion, right? And that would reflect their values. They have different, and that's fine. They have different values than I do, right? So yeah, I would say that I think there is room for context to operate here. And we'll start to see some of the ways that it does as we make our way deeper into this chapter. But we've already kind of seen, you know, how does invoking formal objects help us to specify the justification and correctness? I've used the cat example. Are there any other examples? So I'll use being scared of someone chasing you. Yeah, if you know the person, exactly. Okay, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So someone's running after you. Do you run away in fright or not? Well, it depends on who it is. Do you know the person? Do you value them? And do you value your safety? So multiple values can interact here, right? Yeah, I think that's a good example. How are we doing for time? Oh my goodness. Time marches on. Let's go to the next slide then. Now, at this point, we will note, as the authors do, they discuss this on page 41, if the idea that emotions evaluate in ways that are subject to standards of correctness and justification is to play any substantive role, the apprehension of a given value and the actual exemplification of this value must be, to some extent, independent from one another. What does that mean? That means that evaluative properties cannot be subjective. Why? Why can these values not be subjective? Oh, Leslie offered a good example, getting happy about getting a good grade after being worried about failing the test. Yeah. Well, that illuminates something of your values. And it also allows you to categorize the emotion. You can understand, I'm happy because you have not only beliefs and desires that are interacting in some way, but also values. And being happy tells you that you value success and you've achieved it, right? So yeah, Leslie, that's a great example. There's some way, Chelsea says there's some way that we intuitively respond and have some sort of generalizable, reliable understanding across people and situations. Yeah, that's what we want to go for. We want to say that these evaluative properties are mind independent, right? It's not in one's head, right? We want to say it's mind independent. So this is, I think at some point in the text, they call this objectivist, which is a weird word. Whenever someone says objectivism, I think of Ayn Rand, who's not a real philosopher. So we'll say realism. Yeah, some Ayn Rand hate. Be a capitalist, she says. Be a capitalist. Died on Social Security. Yep, Ayn Rand. Anyway, yeah. So realist position. We want to be a realist about evaluative properties. They exist out there in the world, not in here, right? I mean, you all, at least the philosophers in the chat, will have encountered at one point or another realism or idealism. And when we're talking about realism and idealism, not in politics, but in metaphysics and ontology, what we're talking about is like, what is real? And realism says the external world is real. So if we're a realist about about evaluative properties, they must be mind independent. This is in contrast to idealism, which says that what is really real is the mental, right? But we're not being idealists here about these evaluative properties. We want to go for a realist approach. And this might sound weird at first. I mean, if there are any indirect realists in the room, or even some idealists in the room, you might have a problem with this. Even I find this funny because I don't know. I'm not a direct realist. Yeah, I'm glad this is helping Claire. I'm glad you guys are into this. Yeah, because like, I don't know. Let me get some intuitions pumping here. Who thinks that, I don't know, color is mind independent? Right? If you look at something red in the world, is that property in the world or is it in your mind? Okay, we got a few answers. Oh, lots of different answers. So we got mind. Isabella says mind. Chelsea says not sure. Hayden says mind. Riley says the world. There are color. Yeah, Isabella, correct. There are colorblind people who see it differently in your mind. Leslie says, yeah. So we've got some. If we consider shrimp, because shrimp can see ultraviolet. Is that why? Oh, Robin said something interesting. Color is mind independent, but the qualia of color is mind dependent. That's interesting. So what you're saying is like, okay, the wavelengths of light that cause, a red experience versus blue experience, those are out there in the world. Those are real, but the subjective experience of redness is just in the mind. I would say that's kind of like that's like indirect realism. It's like John Locke, right? There are primary qualities and secondary qualities. Primary quality is like shape, like the shape of this mug is the primary quality, but the color, it's white, it's got a bunch of Canadian bullshit all over it. It's from Tim Hortons. I think my old boss gave me this mug. The colors, the smells, these are mind dependent. These are secondary qualities, right? So, so there's some disagreement about that. This is what we have to work out with regard to evaluative properties, right? If you think that color is mind dependent or mind independent, well, wait until you get a load of this. Are evaluative properties mind independent or not? I'm not sure if color is mind independent. I think I agree with the idea that the qualia of color is mind dependent, but we can talk about color in terms of you know, wavelengths of light, and those are mind independent. Maybe we can do something similar with values, right? So they want to show, the authors want to show that evaluative properties need to be mind independent. We need realism about evaluative properties. So they have to tell us what is wrong with subjectivism about values. So what's the problem here? Well, it's true that lay people and a lot of philosophers think of values as sort of this mysterious, subjective, ineffable sort of thing, right? And the idiom that captured this well for me is, of course, you know, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, right? That is a statement that captures subjectivism about values, if there ever was one. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. A lot of lay people and some philosophers, maybe even me included, try and avoid saying that the world is populated by concrete evaluative properties. We try and do this by explaining them away, you know. In the case of evaluative properties, we might say that value talk is just a reflection of the ways that certain objects or people or situations impinge on us emotionally, to say that it's just subjective. You know, go back to that idiom, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. What does that mean? Well, it means that, you know, so-and-so might find this person or this painting or whatever beautiful, but another person might not, which is just to say that this object impinged on a person in such a way to cause a certain emotional response, like admiration, attraction, verklempt, something like that. And it has not done this to somebody else, right? But is that really a good way to proceed? The authors think there's cause to question this, right? Let's say that, let's just tentatively stipulate that an object's character, like being admirable, consists in the fact that it causes admiration in the subject, right? So take, for example, a painting. This is a painting I showed recently in my other class, The Death of Socrates by David, right? I'm sure, I don't have a picture of it, but I'm sure you can just Google it. Perhaps you've seen it. If I put my video back on, where's it gone? So if I put my video here, you know, The Death of Socrates depicts Socrates at the end of his life in the Phaedo dialogue, where he's about to drink the hemlock, right? Everyone knows the backstory, right? I hope. It's a philosophy class. Yeah, good, yeah. Socrates is, you know, he's got the cup, he's got his hand raised, and he's, all his friends are crying because Socrates is going to die. And the whole dialogue and the painting, I actually do find moving. Socrates, yeah. I think, actually, no, I think Socrates is just fine. Socrates is giving all these arguments why he need not fear death. All philosophers are just preparing for death. That's what philosophy is. So Socrates is having a great time. He's like, hey, man, I'm going to drink this. Drinks it, says to Crito, make sure you sacrifice a rooster for Asclepius, because I'm drinking the medicine. I'm curing the illness of life, you know? So very moving. I love it. It's great. And David is a great painter. He's great. This is a little morbid, but David is really good at painting dead or dying people. You know, it's a little morbid, but it's true. He was very good at that. So if the death of Socrates causes admiration in me, then I can say the painting is admirable, right? So that's what makes it admirable. But then that's just beauty is in the eye of the beholder, right? So if someone else, Sarah, does not admire the painting, then it's not admirable. But now it's admirable to some and not to others. This subjectivism, it seems to be a problem, right? So we could say the painting is admirable at different times for different subjects. What would that mean for evaluative properties? It would mean that evaluative properties are relative to specific subjects and time. So this is subjectivism. It's also relativism. And geez, I don't know how comfortable I am talking about these evaluative properties as mind independent, but I'm sure not comfortable with relativism. So we need to, this is not good enough. Correct. We need to do better than this, the authors say. So let's see what they say. How can we do better? We can do better by rejecting this. This whole approach, we could call it radical subjectivism, right? It really is radical, but we need to not subscribe to it. Beauty is not in the eye of the beholder, it would seem. Why not? Well, here's two reasons. One reason, which you can read on page 42, says, while the view is in part motivated by the idea that it provides a good account of the fact that many disputes as to whether an object exemplifies a given evaluative property rage unabated, it now transpires that it cannot make sense of these disputes without also assuming that those engaged in them are completely confused. Why? Well, let's think about it. Let's think through. Very punchy, correct. But why? Why does this indicate that those who are engaged in such debates about the admirability or beauty of, say, a David or a Rembrandt, contradictory? Well, I would say, let's say that I look at the Death of Socrates, I'm at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and I look at the Death of Socrates, and I'm moved. I feel, admirable painting. Very nice. Chef's kiss. And Sarah says, this is dumb. It's not good. It doesn't stir her emotions, right? And then we get into a debate about why the painting is admirable or not admirable. And I say it's admirable because it's caused me to feel admiration. Okay, but beyond that, what do I have to appeal to? Right? I've got nothing. I've got literally nothing beyond, it just makes me feel that way. But it doesn't make Sarah feel that way, right? Well, I guess we could. The function of art, as I understand it, is to cause an emotional response, right? Or perhaps an intellectual response. In many cases, probably both, right? Artists are supposed to make us think and feel. When we see the art is so good art is supposed to stir your emotions. But good art stirs emotions in different ways for different people, right? Like those like abstract art things where it's just a bunch of squares. Has anyone seen it? Or like a painting? I saw one painting. It was completely Rothko. I'm afraid Hayden says Rothko. I don't know the names of very many visual artists, especially abstract ones. But like, those paintings that are like just a blank white canvas, right? And some people say this is good art. I don't. But it's there. Or like, what's a good example? Probably a lot of people. This is a perennial discussion. You're right, Chelsea. Like, imagine when Andy Warhol came along. A lot of people thought what he was doing was new and innovative and brilliant, and probably a lot of it was. But a lot of other people probably thought, what are you doing? You're just painting cans of soup. What is this? This isn't art, you know? Like, nobody has any way of being right about what they're claiming if radical subjectivism is true, right? There has to be, as David Hume said, some standard of taste, right? And what's the second reason? Another reason, just quoting directly from the text, second, and in direct connection with the point just made, another implication of the present picture is that the very idea of improving one's epistemological standing vis-a-vis evaluative properties makes no sense. Why is that? Well, they say that they're confused, right? That's the word they use, not contradictory, but confused. And I think they're probably right about this. I can't make a claim. I can't make an objective claim and use like subjectivism as evidence for my objective claim, right? And also the idea of improving your epistemological standing. Okay, like let's say I don't like Andy Warhol, and you know, I look at his cans of soup and I think, what the fuck? This is silly. But then I go home and read some books and I educate myself about art. And then I go back and I look at the can of soup and I'm like, oh, I get it now. Has the painting acquired a new property? Have I learned something new about the painting? Am I now sensitive to a property that the painting had all along? Right? Like what is going on? It might not. I mean, if the painting had the property all along, I would say, yeah, that's a little more objective. But if you were to, you know, either say, if the authors say, oh, now I'm confused. There's too much happening on my screen. Yeah, so the authors say, like, if so-and-so looks at a painting and doesn't appreciate it, but then appreciates it later, does the painting now have a new property? But wouldn't it already have had the property if it caused that reaction in someone else? Like, this is all just hopelessly confusing. So subjectivism seems to be a problem. Let's move on before we run out of time. We need to maybe modify the radical subjectivist approach. Maybe we can modify it in the following way. As Deonna and Teroni say on the same page, quote, instead of analyzing evaluative properties in terms of actual emotional responses, one can appeal to dispositions of objects or situations to cause such responses. And this is what Smith does. Smith, I believe what we're talking about here is Adam Smith, possibly, but maybe not. The suggestion is that the painting is admirable if it has the disposition in given circumstances of eliciting admiration in given creatures, for instance, human beings. So maybe the painting doesn't have a property, it has a disposition that in the right circumstances, if it's well lit and there are people who have the knowledge of art, they value art, then the painting will cause in them the right kind of feeling, namely admiration, right? And this modification allows us to account for certain mistakes that happen that are related to evaluative properties and disputes about the exemplification of those properties, right? So if I find the Death of Socrates admirable, but my friend doesn't, well, we can say that that's because one of us just doesn't have the right kind of stuff I need, the right kinds of values to make the value judgment that the painting is admirable, right? Another thing that it does is open up a little bit of room to debate whether whether particular responses or groups of responses are the kind of are the kind of responses that the object is actually disposed to cause, right? Like if I went in to view a beautiful painting, I might feel admiration or perhaps indifference. But if I were to laugh out loud at the death of Socrates, that would just be strange, right? And I can say that because I can say that the painting is not supposed to be disposed to cause levity or humor, right? It also makes the exemplification of evaluative properties independent of particular occurrences of emotional episodes, right? I read the authors as saying this ties this sort of gets us that formal objectness of different emotions, of different emotion types, as I was saying earlier. Now, this is still a subjective account, but it is less radical than the previous account that we've looked at. Now, how many slides have we? Oh, only 2. So, okay. Any questions thus far before we move on to wrap it up? Everybody's quiet. So that's, yes, I agree. All right. Yeah. Yeah. Same goes for everybody. Chelsea says, I'll gather some questions. If everyone else has questions for later in the week too, remember, don't be shy. Talk to me on Discord, email me, use this extra time now that you have an extension for your critical responses, right? So, okay, we've got a new account. Let's call this the dispositionalist account. It's pretty good. It's still subjective, but it's not nearly as radical as the radical subjectivism approach. But we're not done yet. We've got to do some extra work to motivate dispositionalism. Oh my goodness, I can't believe I'm yawning so much. So dispositionalism has to also specify which subjects to appeal to and which of their responses should count as manifestations of the relevant dispositions. The authors kind of clarify it when they put it this way. They say, does the admirable character of a work of art depend on its disposition to cause admiration in all and every creature, or only in those that show minimal interests in the fine arts, or perhaps only in established experts? And of course, whatever class of subjects gets elected, the fact that some of their responses, those elicited when the painting is badly lit, when the subject is moody, tired, or in love with the painter, etc., will fail to qualify as manifestations of the relevant disposition, right? So what do we appeal to here? If a work of art is admirable, does that depend on a disposition to cause admiration in all people all the time throughout time and the universe, or only in people that are interested in art, or only in experts, right? Who do we appeal to, or what do we appeal to? Or in love with the painter, right? If you say the painting is admirable because you're in love with the painter, that has nothing to do with the disposition of the painting to cause admiration, right? Or if you hate the painting because it was painted by, an asshole, perhaps, right? That has nothing to do with the disposition of the painting. And this is something that actually is quite relevant right now because, I hate this term because it's used so divisively and, just by not good people. But, you hear a lot of talk these days about cancel culture, right? What is cancel culture? Yeah, okay. Robin hates cancel culture. Chelsea knew I was going to go there. Yeah, we got to separate the art from the artist. Yeah.
Basically, I think it's more so taking things people have done in their past, or maybe not their past, maybe currently, and either justifiably making them accountable or not justifiably by ending their career, so to say.
Yeah.
Which I never find is really permanent. I feel like they stay canceled, and then like a couple months later, you'll see the person and they're like fine.
Yeah, and
So,
and cancellation is also vague, you know.
yeah.
It's a vague idea, which is another reason to dislike the term. But there is, as Leslie says, you know, dispositionalism. All of what the authors have just said here mean that we kind of have to, if we want to explain why art has the power it does to elicit certain emotions, we kind of have to separate from the art from the artist, right? And I can think of no better example than Picasso, right? Picasso is you know, one of those artists. He's Picasso. He's a household name. I saw a show. I was at the Art Gallery of Ontario a few years back in Toronto, and I saw some of Picasso's paintings. I didn't find them particularly moving, but the people I was there with did. But Picasso was actually kind of a creepy dude who was in a position of power and maintained relationships with women who were much younger and arguably vulnerable to certain abuses, right? Yeah. Yeah, you can read this. You can read this. Should we cancel Picasso? No, I don't think so. Well, why not? Well, he's dead, you know, right? Maybe everyone's, really. Or an example that everybody's maybe more familiar with, Michael Jackson, right?
Yeah.
This is a tough one, you know, because
dangerous territory.
yeah, and
okay, I would say about Michael Jackson, the thing is, and I don't want to be like that person, but I'm just gonna play. You know, I hate saying devil's advocate because I hate those people in class. But like, I'll just say it. Okay, so you know the documentary that came out, right, about it, like Neverland or something like that.
I actually have not seen it yet. I've only heard clips, but I'm aware of it.
It's basically of the survivor, like quote unquote victims, right? Talking about their experience. Well, their stories have been like disproven and they don't add up. And people think because he's dead, he can't really defend himself. So because there's inadequacies in the story, that's why Michael Jackson in society is kind of like a pass, I guess I would say. Versus like R. Kelly is like a no, like that's evidence of that, you know.
And also, I mean, I should say I agree, and I don't know enough about the allegations against Michael Jackson or this documentary, and I know, yes, believe survivors, absolutely. I'm not saying we shouldn't listen to survivors of sexual violence at all. We do need to listen to them. However, even if it were true, right? Let's just say for argument's sake, it's true that Michael Jackson did these horrible things.
Right.
You put Billie Jean on and, you know, you cannot help it, right?
Yeah, I know. It's a tricky one. It's really tricky.
It's tricky. I would say, I would say Harvey Weinstein is an example.
Or Woody Allen. Woody Allen.
Woody Allen.
And he's married to his daughter.
Yeah. That's weird. That's
weird.
So weird. Super weird. But I go back to the example of R. Kelly. Okay, so in the case of R. Kelly, we know.
Yeah,
we know he did horrible things, and it's been proven beyond a reasonable doubt in a court of law. And R. Kelly, you know, just is not Michael Jackson. You know, he's not. He's, you know, I know art is subjective, but, you know, Michael Jackson's up here. R. Kelly is not. Just saying. And yeah, people are asking about Woody Allen. Yes, he would go on to marry his adoptive daughter, which is
I needed to specify adoptive. It doesn't make it much better, but it is like a little bit better.
I mean, it's still really creepy, and it's still like, you know.
He would go into her bedroom though when she was like younger.
Yes.
So
yeah.
It's not just like, oh, let me just marry her. He clearly had like some type of disgusting pedophilic thing going on. So
really not good. Yeah.
And that's the thing. There are so many examples that we can think of. Like Harvey Weinstein produced movies. I really like Quentin Tarantino movies, and they were produced by the Weinstein Company, but it's not like Harvey Weinstein was directing the movies, so I can still enjoy what's my favorite? I don't even know. Kill Bill. I can still watch Kill Bill and enjoy it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And you could argue even sometimes like it's a character. Like some people argue, okay, like for example, Bill Cosby, right? They can say, oh, he was a character on TV, and when he represented for the time of like a positive Black family in the 1970s, like that was a really good image, and that's a character versus him in real life is someone different. So I guess you could argue both things. Like I don't think it's wrong or right. It's just up to personal, your personal choice.
Yeah, exactly.
Can I?
Oh yeah, sorry.
Add to that, because I was also thinking like, specifically in the example you just gave, like it depends on how these people are either painted in the media or how they hold themselves up, because there are artists that I listen to who are really politically and socially active in certain, their convictions. They're very strong and very clear about what they think. And if they kind of mess up or commit to something that is directly against that, I hold them to a bit of a higher standard because I know more about what they're working for, and it kind of feels like they've used, like Grimes is a really good example.
Oh yeah, Communist Manifesto.
Like, what is going on?
Like, what are you doing?
Yeah, I agree.
Right? Whereas someone like, I can't think of really anyone else. Like if Justin Bieber, I guess, came out and was like, I support Trump, I'd be like, okay, like it's hard because I don't listen to his music, so I don't care as much.
Yeah.
But he's never made himself look like he's appealing to me who can't afford ramen on the weekends. Like
yeah.
Yeah. Like kind of a different. Yeah.
But I went through this well, there's been just so many instances, but I guess the example that comes to my mind is actually Louis C.K.
That was the worst.
That was the worst.
Yes.
Because and this is personal, like before this all went down, I was so sad about this because the man was funny, and he was he didn't seem like an asshole, and his comedy was thoughtful in a disgusting sort of way, and the whole incident with the masturbation and whatnot was a long time ago, and he had ceased that behavior and apologized to the women, and then years later it all came out. And the thing that got me was like, yeah, the behavior was unacceptable, but also, he kind of swept it under the rug, and kind of, it was almost like doing comedy in bad faith, maybe. Like, he was the kind of guy who would present himself as very, almost, I hate the term woke, but very aware of, like gay rights, trans rights, women's rights. He was very positive toward those groups in his comedy. He's not doing if Louis C.K. would make a trans joke, it wouldn't be, everyone else's trans joke. Yeah, he's not cutting people down. He's not saying, I identify as an attack helicopter. He's actually telling funny jokes that don't dehumanize people. And then you find out he did this horrible thing, and I was like, oh, geez, man, I thought you were for real, but it was such a letdown.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And then seeing listening to other comedians talk about him since then, and what things have been like in SNL since then, and what he's been doing since then. I mean, he recently came out with more work, and I haven't watched it yet because, again, part of me is just so like he's what got me into comedy. He's what got me into stand-up. And it's just, again, so it cuts deeper in that sense.
Yeah.
Because that kind of, that sense of betrayal, almost like you've made a contract with us, almost, that there was this understanding that we evaluated what you were doing.
Yeah.
At a higher level.
Yeah, exactly. It's like some people regardless of the quality of their artwork, some people seem to let us down more than others. We know that there are bad people out there, right? But that sadness and disappointment you might feel over an artist that you care about going through some kind of sexual misconduct thing or endorsing Donald Trump or something, just makes you like, oh, you know, like what a letdown. And that's a perfect example of value judgments and trying to find where is the admirable character. It can't be in the artist. It has to be in the art.
But it's also in us.
But it's also in us. And that's why sometimes people who are really good at stuff still get canceled, right? I guess. Anyway, wow, sorry, what a rant.
That was really good.
Yeah, that was fun. Let's see where we are. I think we just have one more slide. I'm going to skip this bit about Smith and Hume. So can everyone still hear me? My computer went a little screwy there.
Yes.
Okay, good. So what do we need to do? Well, even if we could identify the relevant subjects, the relevant responses, you know, who is this painting disposed to cause this reaction in? What reaction are we talking about? Even if we identify all that, the authors say we should still reject dispositionalism, because on dispositionalism, whether something actually possesses the evaluative property is still dependent on brute psychological fact, they say, something in the mind. And remember, we're looking for something mind independent. Evaluative properties need to be mind independent. So in this respect, dispositionalism does not differ enough from the radical subjectivism that we discussed earlier. The dispositional approach does open up a space between evaluative properties and emotional dispositions, but it doesn't quite satisfy, it doesn't satisfactorily account for the correctness and incorrectness of emotions, right? It does not satisfactorily give us the corrective, or what am I looking for here? The correctness conditions for this emotional response versus that emotional response, right? Because if something is correct, it has to be tied to the world. Remember? Anything that has correctness and justification has to have a mind to world direction of fit. That's why we need a mind independent account, right? Boom, that was a light bulb moment. Yeah. So that is why the authors will move on from dispositionalism. So they're moving on from the more radical subjective and dispositionalist stuff to discuss something called the fitting attitude analysis, or FA analysis approach. This is, again, another family of approaches, kind of like the mixed theory was a family of approaches. But what they all have in common, as we'll see next time, is this idea that the existence of a widespread and stable disposition, to have certain responses or to cause certain responses, is actually compatible with the absence of the relative evaluative property. So it's kind of like a less subjective version of dispositionalism, I guess we could say. So that is what we will do for next time. We're going to continue on with chapter 4. We're going to talk about FA analysis in further detail. And then we'll just have a very teeny tiny little bit of discussion about value realism. Reason this bit is so short is because the authors will discuss this kind of thing going forward in the rest of the book. But that is where we will begin and end next time. So, right, that's it. That's it. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night. Thanks, everyone. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Welcome. And remember, don't be shy on Discord or email with the questions. Everyone's leaving. All right. I guess I'll get on out of here. Welcome, everyone. Thank you all. This was a really interesting class. This was fun. All right. Let's get out of here. End program.